And welcome in to Pressbox Live. And Pressbox Live is brought to you by C3 American Exteriors. I was out at a project today that they're doing, a big church out in Lutherville, Timonium. I watched the expert care with which they gave their job there. I like these guys. I know these guys. I trust the guys at C3 American Exteriors. You'll have no bigger expense on the home you own than the roof, and they can help you get it done sometimes for just the cost of your insurance deductible. Go to c3america.com to find out the details. Gary Stein is with me, my co-host, and with us is somebody we've remiss. Gary, we've been doing these Zooms for about a year, and I always kept saying, well, we'll get Glenn on to talk about that, and we'll get Glenn to talk on about this, but no better time than to bring in the host of the Glenn Clark Show on PressBoxOnline.com and Facebook Live, than Glenn Clark. Glenn, how are you, my friend?
Stan, do you really not know that the show is called Glenn Clark Radio? Do you really? I mean, we've been doing this for 7 years now.
And Glenn, I think
Clark
we've had
Radio
you on before, if I'm not mistaken.
What's that?
I have filled in for you, Gary, when you big time Stan a couple times.
Okay,
And you said, "I'm sorry, I'm too important. I've got very very significant things to do. I'm a very important man."
that could be every week, Glenn. I mean,
that's a good point. That's a good point.
Well,
so
we've got Glenn Clark from Glenn Clark Radio. He's on with us tonight, and there's really some rhyme to the reason here, Glenn.
Yep.
Tell folks about what we're doing. We'll get into talking a little Ravens draft, like analysis, but let's let everybody know what we as an entity are doing and the part you're playing in it starting tomorrow night.
Yeah, we're going to have a really great experience. It's finally time to get back out a little bit and be in the community again. And so we're taking our Project Game Day draft special on the road. We've been doing a live draft show for about all of those 7 years, Stan. And so we're finally taking it out. And we have partnered up with our friends at Great Eights Memorabilia, who are a big part of Mo Gaba's final couple of years and made the Mo's Rose happen at M&T Bank Stadium. And they're doing a charity event with Meals on Wheels tomorrow night. I guess, so depending on when you're watching this, Thursday night, the first night of the draft, the 29th, at Looney's Pub, Perry Hall. And we're going to be there with them and Gus Edwards.
What time will you be there?
The event starts at 7. We're going to kick off our broadcast around 7:30. It'll be myself, Ken Zales, and Jeremy Kahn. And we will just be, this is a less formal show. This is more or less just sort of a reaction show as the draft unfolds. We react to each pick, what it means for what the Ravens might be trying to do, what's a reach, who's somebody that we'd be willing to see them move up. I think everybody tends to say that the point of this show is to see our reaction, and to see us lose our minds when someone that we're in love with as a fit for the Baltimore Ravens goes off the board a few picks earlier than we expected, when the Ravens do something crazy, something along those lines. So that's the point of doing this show, but we're just going to do it on location. We want you guys to come out and support Meals on Wheels. You can meet Gus Edwards. You can go to great8smemorabilia.com to get your tickets.
And which Looney's Pub is?
Yeah, Looney's Pub, Perry Hall. So
okay.
Right there on Route 1. The old, what it used to be years ago, it was the Harp years ago.
Yeah.
We'll be there, and we're expecting a great crowd. And it just should be a great time to be back out again. It's been too long. We're going to do everything safely and distanced and do everything the right way, but it's going to be great to be back out among people. And we're going to be looking forward to doing some more of these as the summer goes on. It'll be nice to see people again and take the show on the road.
Now, we know that sports betting is going to be legal at some point in time, probably in 2021.
Yeah.
If we were betting, what time would we think that the Ravens are going to pick? Is that about 10:30?
If they hold
10:45?
You know, it's funny, Stan, I feel like the drafts have moved quicker in recent years. Like they've really something about the TV partners, and I think because it's on ABC now, so it's on a network.
And they're trying to get it over by a certain time.
I think they want it to be done by 11:30 at the latest. So right. I think we see the Ravens picking late, maybe in the 10:30 range, somewhere around there. I'm fascinated by if they're going to hold on to the second pick they acquired from the Chiefs, or some of the crazy scenarios where could that be in play to try to go get Julio Jones or something like that. I think it could be an exciting night. But if I was a betting man, if I was allowed to put my money down, Stan, I'd say the Ravens take a player at 27 and they back out of that 31st pick and try to acquire a couple more picks as the draft goes on.
All right, before I give Gary Stein over to you. So what else are we doing throughout the draft on PressBoxOnline.com and on Facebook Live with our coverage?
Facebook. You're at facebook.com/PressBoxSports, PressBoxOnline.com/radio as always for watching and listening to the shows. Project Game Day Draft Special. So night one's from Loonies. And then we'll be live again on night 2 starting at 7. So Friday night, the 30th, it'll be myself, KZ, and Kyle Ottenheimer. We'll be back in the Chesapeake Employers Insurance studio. Stan, I know you're in the beautiful, spacious Chesapeake Employers Insurance back office, which it's looking gorgeous this evening.
This is the green. We call it the green room here.
The Chesapeake Employers Insurance green room. Let's make sure we get that right.
Yes.
Just like
Gary, we had Jim Ferry on last week.
Right.
And he did it from the Chesapeake Employers car. You know,
I think most of Gary's life is going to be spent in Chesapeake Employers Insurance rooms moving forward.
Right.
So,
I'll tell you what,
looking
if
forward
I paid my mortgage, I'd give him my house, you know?
No question.
Whatever it takes.
I see a little logo right there for Stein starting very soon.
No doubt. So,
All right,
we'll be back in studio Friday night starting at 7 o'clock.
And I'll be on
throughout the
sometime.
second,
You're going to give
Yep.
me a buzz, right? Okay.
Yep, we've got the magic of technology. You'll be zooming in with us on Friday night, so we're looking forward to that.
All right. Gary, I know you have probably some more detailed, real questions about the actual draft for Glenn.
Well, I mean, I think we should all start off with just kind of looking at this thing, you know, on a wide angle lens, guys. I mean, let's talk a little bit about the Ravens, you know, before we get into players. Let's talk a little bit about the Ravens' needs, what they've done in the offseason so far, the big Orlando Brown trade, the Julio Jones rumors, which I think are totally unfounded, but we can certainly talk about that. Okay.
Strong disagreement.
Okay, well, we can talk about that. But so let's look at it very holistically here, Glenn. What do you see as far as what the Ravens are doing, how it's unfolding in the offseason, and what they want to try to improve upon in 2021?
Gary, despite you being wrong about literally everything, I think we can all agree that there are three significant areas of need for the Baltimore Ravens right now. That's wide receiver, edge rush, and offensive line. And there's a bunch of different ways you can look at the offensive line need. You can say they need a right tackle because they traded away Orlando Brown, but it's possible they think that Tyree Phillips could be the answer at right tackle. The word is they're going to bring in Alejandro Villanueva. I do not believe that he's the answer at right tackle for even a second. He's not a good run blocker. He was a declining player anyway. I don't think he's a 17-game starting right tackle, but he could be part of the equation. If you want to say they still need a center, you can say that. They can move Bradley Bozeman over. The point is they need to add at least one, if not multiple bodies to the offensive line. And then they have edge rush and receiver. So I think those are the three biggest areas. I'm not surprised by how they've approached the offseason. They've signed one legitimate free agent, that being Sammy Watkins. I think I like the Kevin Zeitler move better, but he was a player that was cut, so he doesn't count against their compensatory pick strategy. But they haven't done a lot to upgrade a roster that I think we all know wasn't quite. You can complain about the coaching and the play calling and all of that all you want, but I think if we're being honest, the roster has enough deficiencies before this offseason began. I don't believe that we could say in any world they were on par yet with the Kansas City Chiefs. And, you know, they're pretty close with the Buffalo Bills, more or less any team that might be rising. So I still think they have steps they need to take as a roster in order to make a leap to compete with the Chiefs in the AFC. And if that's the goal, I mean, right now, this roster is good to compete in the AFC North and make the playoffs and all those things. But if it's about taking that next step and winning a Super Bowl, I still think they have a couple of significant roster holes that need to be filled. Will they be able to do all that in the draft? I don't know. We're not enamored necessarily with a number of the wide receivers after the top three that'll long be gone. So I'm not sure what they'll be able to do there. The edge rushers outside of maybe Kwity Paye, nobody's really all that enamored with. It does seem to be a good draft for tackles. So I think that might be one area that they shouldn't have much of a problem solving if they go that route in the draft, and also a pretty good draft for interior linemen as well. So that one, I think they shouldn't have too much trouble solving during the course of the draft.
You know,
so I'm not gonna disagree with anything you said, but I think you kind of skipped over a point, or maybe you said it, but you said a lot, so maybe I missed it. I think not only do the Ravens have holes to fill on the roster, but the key players that are on the roster need to vastly improve.
Sure.
And,
Yep.
Okay, right. And what I'm specifically honing in for a minute, look, Hollywood Brown has a future in the league. Okay.
Yep.
But he can't play like he did last year for the rest of his career. Okay. Lamar Jackson could be the best player in the league one day, but he has to improve over what he did at the end of last year. Because when push comes to shove at the end of the day, when the Ravens play games in January, and now there's only 8 teams rather than 32, your weaknesses are going to get exposed by the really good teams. And that's basically happened 3 years in a row. So not only do the Ravens have holes, but their marquee players who they're banking their future on are also young and need to improve.
I don't disagree with any of that, Gary. I think the Lamar Jackson conversation is complicated, right? Because what would we say if J.K. Dobbins doesn't whiff on the block on the play before the interception and the wide open touchdown that should have happened? It's a complicated conversation with Lamar, but at a base level, I don't necessarily disagree. I'd still like to see him improve as an outside the numbers passer. Something that would greatly help his ability to improve as an outside the numbers passer would be a better outside receiver to throw the football to, right? Like the guy that everybody wanted Miles Boykin to be, that he's been in very fleeting moments and nothing more than that. It would be nice to have that guy. That would help a great deal in throwing the ball outside the numbers. It doesn't change the fact that he also has to improve as a passer outside the numbers. There's no doubt about that. And yeah, I mean, Hollywood Brown played great down the stretch. His last 8 games were really outstanding, but he struggled mightily before that. Mark Andrews in big games. We have to have a conversation. For as good of a player as Mark Andrews is, he's a very good player. In big games, he's tended to play his worst, put the ball on the ground too much, just struggled in big spots. So that's got to improve as well. But they can't solve that over the next 3 days, right? Like they can solve the rest of the roster. And it has to be done. I don't disagree, in concert with some of those guys that are stepping up. Patrick Queen, I think we all saw solid things from last season, but absolutely must be better in pass coverage, or it sort of becomes a CJ Mosley situation where you're like, I like the player, but he's not a difference maker.
Yeah.
Right. You know, he's a good football player. So they need that level to come as well from Patrick Queen, who I think we all believe is a promising football player and look pretty good.
So I had a conversation the other day with Ken, who my resident expert on this topic, and he pointed out something that I was interesting about whether they should trade the second pick, one of their 2 first-round picks. And Ken was saying, out of the 32 players that are going to get selected in the first round, right? It's 32 teams, correct?
Yep.
Am I right on? 5 of them, at least 5, are going to pick quarterbacks. That means that you've got 2 of the best 26 or 27 players that you're going to be able to get in this. Somebody's going to slide back that shouldn't be where the Ravens get them. He was much in favor of, if we do try and accumulate more picks, of using maybe a little bit later pick or one of the picks we've obtained from next year to do that, rather than trade out of the first round. He likes the talent level aside from the quarterbacks. He thinks it's a good picking ground for getting a couple talented players.
So, Stan, I agree with Ken. And I wrote about that a little bit at PressBoxOnline.com this week. I am not in favor of. I'll point out, last year the Ravens ended up in their maneuvering coming away with 4 third-round picks, for example, and none of them are guys that we've written off because it's only been 1 year.
Right.
But of the group, and it's no offense, Tyree Phillips is a maybe. Malik Harrison, we saw almost nothing of a year ago. I think we all like Justin Madubuike. I think he, of the 4, was by far the best, and still, it's, when we say the best, it's limited. And Devin Duvernay did essentially nothing throughout the course of his rookie season. And I'm not trying to write those guys off or say that they can't help or that they won't be good football players or maybe even difference makers one day. But to go back to the original point, 4 third-round picks, none of which genuinely helped you in trying to win a Super Bowl a year ago. So I don't think the path for the Ravens in closing the gap to win a Super Bowl is having more guys that might be projects, right, 3 years down the road. We all remember that famous 4th round years ago where they got Tavon Young and Willie Henry and Capron. Who else was it in that group? It was the running back Kenneth Dixon and Alex Lewis, and people were raving about this amazing 4th round the Ravens had. Well, they've got nothing to show for that 4th round other than Tavon Young was half decent for the one season that he was actually healthy so far. It was a horrible round as we go back and look at it. The Ravens need special. They need special players. So I agree to play devil's advocate. Someone would say, hey, how different really is the 31st pick in the draft from if they were to say move back to number 40? And the answer might not be all that much, but I still am inclined to say right now, you need top level guys that are ready to come in and help immediately to try to close the gap and win a Super Bowl. That's what you need. You don't need projects for 3-4 years down the road.
And I think Ken's point about the 5 or 6 quarterbacks that are going to go in the first round means that there will be a better class of player making up the rest of the round.
I was just going to chime in. I mean, not only, Stan, the 5 quarterbacks are going to be selected, but more than likely at least 2 running backs are going to go.
Yeah.
And that's a position the Ravens don't need either.
Right.
So that's 7 players, and they're all going to go before 27, more than likely. So that's 7 players in front of the Ravens number 27. So that's 19 players that the Ravens could be in the pool for will be gone by the time they pick. So they're going to get a top 20 player.
You could probably throw in cornerback as well with that. I would be very surprised if the Ravens went cornerback in round 1, given the depth that they have on their roster currently. Now, somebody would say, if the right guy falls, if a Caleb Farley's sitting there, you grab the right guy because you can never have too many cornerbacks. But if we look at their roster, we would say it's not a priority. Right.
Glenn,
right.
You didn't get a chance because it was against your show. Did you end up going back and listening to the draft preview?
I listened to some of it, Stan. It's not even really about it being against my show as much as I just get so frustrated by how unwilling they are to answer.
No, I understand that, but there was a certain point though. I thought Eric said something about it. That's the safety position might be something that they're surprisingly are looking to come out of this draft with a significant safety.
And I think that's a lot of people have made that point. There's a name, Trayvon Morig from TCU, who is a very good safety, who is expected to be available late in the first round. And there have been a lot of arguments made that this is a player the Ravens should take. Some people have compared him to Derwin James from the Chargers, who the Ravens had the chance to grab a couple years ago, decided instead to trade out of the 16th pick. They got Hayden Hurst instead. And I'm not trying to tell you that Trayvon Morig is Derwin James, because Derwin James, when healthy, is one of the biggest wreckers in football. But if that type of player, if that type of difference maker is available, while I think everybody likes Chuck Clark and Deshaun Elliott, and particularly Deshaun Elliott really showed some things as the season went on a year ago, I don't think any of us believe that they are game changers, that they are elite players in this league. And if the opportunity comes along to get an elite type of safety, a true game changer, someone who can make a difference coming up into the box, as well as playing in coverage, I would not be surprised if the Ravens went that route and tried to grab that player, and maybe even finally did that hybrid linebacker safety thing that we've seen so many other teams do over the years, and try to use a player that way. It would not surprise me. I would still be surprised if it was a true corner. I don't know where their snaps are coming from when you look at a roster. I know, knock on wood, there's going to be injuries, but right now when you look around and see Marlon Humphrey and Marcus Peters and Jimmy Smith and hopefully a healthy Tavon Young, I don't know where the snaps are coming for another corner at this point.
Hey guys, one of the topics I'd like to get into is we've both watched Eric now. He's run 2 drafts, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, he's been in charge.
Run 2. What do you see, Glenn? And I'll throw it to you too, Gary. I mean, we don't usually question you when you're hosting this with me, but what do you see as the primary difference? Or do you think they're exactly alike as to how they run the draft?
I mean, I'll go first. I mean, I really don't see a major difference between how Eric runs the draft and how Ozzie runs the draft. I would say that if there is a difference, I think that Eric is more open to drafting higher skill position players than Ozzie would normally. Ozzie builds his teams inside out. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, obviously it's worked. Ravens are one of the best organizations in the league forever, since 2000. But I think Eric is a little bit more open, knowing that the game has changed also, by the way, tremendously over time since Ozzie was picking back in the 90s and early 2000s. four skill position players. I think J.K. Dobbins coming to the Ravens last year, being there even for the Ravens, and Eric pouncing on him. I'm not saying Ozzie wouldn't have done that, but I think Eric is more likely to do that. But as far as them handling the draft is concerned, overall, I don't see much of a difference.
Glenn, you agree?
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree, Gary. So the conspiracy theorists of the world would point out that the Baltimore Ravens spent 2.5 decades having never drafted an LSU player. And in the second draft, after Ozzie Newsome was no longer GM, the first pick that they have is an LSU linebacker, right?
So what?
I can't join. They drafted an Auburn player in the first round. Ozzie Newsome is general manager. I can't join. It's weird. I mean, it's very weird that a program that significant, the Ravens had never drafted a player out of that program. But I don't buy into that. I don't think that all that much has changed. Ozzie is still in the room. He's going to be back in the room this year. I guess nobody was actually in the room a year ago, but they're all going to be back in the room this year. I don't think it's a drastic change for how they do business. Eric learned everything that he knows about running a franchise from Ozzie Newsome. So, could there be subtle differences? Could we see maybe something a little bit more bold at some point from Eric DeCosta? Maybe, but in fairness, the last draft that Ozzie Newsome ran, they moved back in the first round to get Lamar Jackson, who nobody else wanted. So It's not as if he never did anything bold either.
So this year, how many, including the trade with the Chiefs, how many picks are we looking at that the Ravens now have this year? Is it 9 or 10?
Nine picks.
Do you want to actually make
point.
9 picks, or do you want to try and turn something, do you have enough money to sign all 9 picks?
Well, yeah, they've got.
I'm sorry.
Here, I'll go ahead. They've got money.
Go ahead.
They've got money. They do. They have $15 million right now. They got plenty of money for their draft picks. The question is, what all else might they do? And that's where the Julio Jones thing comes up, and we can talk about that at some point. The word is that they're going to sign Villanueva after the draft. On May 3rd is the date that you can sign players again without it affecting the compensatory strategy. So the expectations, they're at least going to sign Villanueva. I could see them still being involved with Dennis Kelly, who I think makes more sense as a potential starting right tackle, who was with the Titans last year and started all 16 games. Could they sign a veteran edge rusher as well? These aren't going to be guys that are going to cost you a lot of money. The Justin Houstons, the Melvin Ingrams of the world, who are still lingering on the free agent market, they could do that. Some of those decisions might, be impacted by what it is they end up doing during the course of the draft. It might be that they're saying, hey, we'll sign this guy if we don't spend the draft pick early on him. So the money's not a problem. The question about do they have 9 roster spots? I think that's a great question. At the moment, I would say they don't. They don't have 9 roster spots. That, we can talk about the wide receiver thing. So is James Prochet on the chopping block? And I'm not. The answer might be yes. Let's not oversell James Prochet. It's not as if he was a second round pick a year ago. And we didn't really see anything from him, but he was a promising player that a year ago, everybody said, hey, this was a deep wide receiver draft. And, in a different year, perhaps he goes a little bit earlier. It's just there were so many wide receivers this year that he fell down a little bit. I don't think they have 9 roster spots today. Training camp can change that, and injuries that might come up that could change that. And so I would be willing to listen to them going the opposite way. I would be willing to listen to them if Kwity Paye, for example, is the edge rusher that they're in love with, and he lingers to 21, and they say, hey, if we can package one of our 3rd round picks and something else to go up and get Kwity Paye instead of holding on to 27 or 31, I would be in favor of that. Finding the guy that's going to be a difference maker quickly, I think, should be the priority, not making sure that you have a lot of bodies going into the summer.
Right. So I'm going to agree with some of that. Let's go back to the conversation of 27 and 31. Do they move one of those picks? The conversation earlier potentially was about moving one of those picks to move back and get more draft choices. No, you don't do that. You don't trade Orlando Brown, an all-pro at 2 different positions in the prime of his career, to one of your top competitors in the AFC, if not the NFL, and move back from that pick to get other guys in the 3rd or 4th round or whatever. Now, if you're going to talk about packaging one of those picks to move up, just like you just said, okay, now you're talking, okay? Because now you're going to get a higher quality player a first-round talent, which is exactly what you want for Orlando Brown. You don't need another third-round player. You don't need another fourth-round pick for Orlando Brown. Okay, that's the point there. So yes, Stan, Glenn, you're right. Do they have 9 roster spots? Probably not. Could they package one of those first-round choices with something to move up to get a player that they really want, that they don't think that is going to be around at 27? Absolutely.
Okay. I think we're all in agreement that's the way this would go if they do. Glenn, why don't you clue us in, because I'm unfamiliar with these Julio Jones rumors. What is sort of the thinking there?
So the Falcons are in a cap crunch, and the word is they really are interested in moving Julio Jones, and it's not one of these they're just going to do it for the sake of doing it types of deals. But the understanding is, and also given where they are as a franchise, there's some thought that they could be in the market for a quarterback, and they could be prepared to move on to the next phase of their organization post Matt Ryan. And so it would all time out nicely if they could do that at the same time as they move on from Julio Jones, after clearly Calvin Ridley has established himself as their sort of superstar wide receiver of the future. He is, as advertised, he is that good. What makes it unique is that Julio Jones, based on this June 1st date, the number could be about $15 million. That could be about the number that you would have to pay. The Ravens right now would be up against that because they only have about $15 million against the cap. They've been installed as the betting favorite to land Julio Jones, which doesn't necessarily mean anything. But in poking around, for example, I had Sal Palantonio on the show today and expected that, and he's obviously quite plugged in with the Ravens. He's going to be working with them during the draft. Expected him to say, "No, that's not what the Ravens would do. That's not who they are." And it was the exact opposite, which is, no, I've talked to the Ravens. They're absolutely monitoring the Julio Jones situation. They're aware of it. And given the price, which for whatever reason, and this is the part that I can't figure, I get that Julio Jones is 32, and I know that he missed half the season with a hamstring injury a year ago, but it's a hamstring. It's not a knee. It's not a life changer. Didn't require surgery. What they're talking about is that to get the cap relief, the Falcons might only be talking about a second round pick and more, maybe a back end of the first round pick. There's some confusion about whether or not they would need to make the trade after the draft because of that June 1st designation. Would they be able to make a trade now and designate it for post June 1 so the number could go down? They could split the salary over 2 seasons. That's something that we don't have all of the information about. So we still got to sort through that a little bit, but it's going to be something to be monitoring. That what we know right now is the Falcons are listening. He's not a malcontent. They're not trying to push him out the door. It's where they are as an organization that they're listening. And there is a lot of logic that for a team that is struggling to get free agent wide receivers to sign in Baltimore, that going the trade route to acquire a receiver would make more sense. And that the unique situation for Julio Jones is that it's no longer as important for him to get big numbers. He's gotten through that part of his career. Now it's about winning. And so he's never been a problem. He's never been someone that's, again, I'll use the term malcontent again. He's never been that guy. There is a lot of logic. I spoke to a couple people down in Atlanta who said it would make a lot of sense for what they know of him for him to be interested in being in Baltimore, despite the fact they're going to run the ball more and he won't have the ball thrown his way. So I'm not telling you it's going to happen. I'm not telling you that I would even bet money on it. I'm saying I think there's more to it than what we do every time we hear the Ravens connected to a significant player, which is to say fans are just being fans on Twitter and saying crazy things. I think there's a lot of logic to all of the parts involved for the Ravens to be in on the Julio Jones conversation. Will it happen? We'll see. But I think there's a lot of logic there.
One of the players you are plugged into on the Ravens, and you're plugged into the player and the player's wife, is Bradley Bozeman and his wife, Nikki. Have you ever had a discussion with Bradley at all about, does he like playing center? Does he think he can play center in the National Football League? And what's your take on, and I'll ask Gary the same question, whether the Ravens simply say, hey, this guy played college football at an elite program in Alabama and was a center. Let's plan on using him at center to fill that hole.
Bradley is, and he and Nikki are both brilliant in the way that they know they're not going to come out and say, hey, I want to play guard or I want to play center, because they see the tea leaves too. It could be either one. I think this really is as simple as the Ravens have given themselves some flexibility. If the draft plays out, that they can get a top-notch guard at whatever spot they have, they'll take that guy and know they can move Bradley Bozeman to center. Okay. If the draft plays out, the guy they get is a center. You know, if it's Landon Dickerson from Alabama, if it's Creed Humphrey from Oklahoma, Quinn Miners, that they'll keep Bradley Bozeman at left guard. The more that I talk to football people, the more of them that will tell you if it's working, why mess with it? Bradley Bozeman was maybe the best pulling guard in all of football a year ago. He has fit in perfectly with the Ravens run system. There's no reason to think that he wouldn't do the same at center. He played at a very high level at Alabama. He was well thought of. He still gets to be a mauler after he snaps the ball. He gets to move downfield. You would think that all of that would work.
I just saw 2 games of the New England game played up in New England, and then the game against.
Well, I mean, they're going to have a different center next. Yeah, there's no doubt
that the center position costs you 2 games. You know,
there's no question that they're going to solve center in one way or the other. I think the question really will come down to how the draft plays out, and if that guy is sitting there for them, and if they use a high pick on a center, they'll go into next year assuming that guy's their center. And if they don't, then I think come Monday we're going to have our answer. If they get through a few rounds of this draft and they haven't used a high pick on, I mean, might have the answer by Saturday. Right. If they get through a few rounds and they haven't selected a center, I think you've got your answer that Bradley Bozeman will be playing center next season.
Yeah. Gary, you have a thought there? Because it does seem to me like if you go into the draft with Bozeman, I'm less likely to pull the trigger on a center during the draft because I got other needs.
Look, I may be in the minority here, and not only on this call, but in Baltimore, I think we're totally overthinking this. Okay, Stan, the 2 games that you're talking about, one of them was in the rain. Okay, the guy had just come in, if I'm not mistaken, and the other game, the guy's thumb got hurt. Okay, I mean, we're not. Look, these centers. Even the ones that messed it up.
The game in New England was multiple snaps.
But to Gary's point, there was a monsoon. I mean, it was miserable conditions.
Look, my point is this: these centers that we're talking about, they can snap the ball. Okay, they've snapped the ball their whole lives. They've snapped the ball their whole careers as Ravens. You're talking about a couple of games. Ill-timed, absolutely. Losses, bad. Did it cost the team at the end of the standings? Perhaps. Okay, maybe it did. But I don't think you're going to go ahead and base a selection of somebody on 1 or 2 games. Again, I could be in the minority. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's an overreaction. Okay, that's number one.
But to be fair, we know Matt Skura is gone, for example. We know he's already gone, so he's not an option. Patrick McCary could still be an option.
Okay.
Also struggled as the season went along, but we do know that one of them for sure is definitely not an option.
Okay. Now, as far as the Julio Jones thing is concerned, Glenn, you made a lot of good points, and I think it's very sensible what you say. But the one crick is this: it's the salary cap. Okay, even at $15 million, which isn't a tremendous amount for a top-notch wide receiver, and maybe he's a peg down now. Okay, but you've got Lamar Jackson coming up. They're going to do the 5th year. I'm positive it's their intention to do after that. Okay, so he's not going to be playing for $2.5 million a year anymore. He's going to be playing for $20 to $30 to $40 million a year. So now you've got a $15 million guy, and you've got a $30 million guy, and you've got $45 million tied up in the cap, and now you're really up against it. So I'm not saying you're going to go back to the Joe Flacco situation after 2012, but you are going to be in a situation that's fairly close. So I think that's the one area here where I think that this argument falls apart. I'm not saying it's impossible either, okay, because the Ravens are aggressive and they know that everybody's got a tight window in the NFL. So I'm not saying it's impossible, but that salary cap situation looms large in this situation.
I think it does to some extent, Gary. I think there's 2 things there. One, I would say, is the salary cap is expected to grow exponentially almost in the coming. This year we know was an aberration, not just because of the pandemic, because the new media money hadn't kicked in yet. And we saw what that new media money was. It was bonkers money. The salary cap is expected to grow significantly. Now, as it does, as you rightfully point out, in a couple of years, right, particularly your quarterback salary is expected to go up significantly. So with them having made a decision, they're not paying Orlando Brown. There are only a couple of guys left right now that are demanding contracts. Of course, the quarterback one being the the white whale, but they're letting the salary cap sort of figure itself out before they make a decision about where the quarterback's contract is going to be. And you're not locking yourself in for 5 years with Julio Jones. It's 3 more years that you're locked in for with big numbers when it comes to Julio Jones. And there'll be some flexibility when you get to the final year of that. I think, there is a hard line problem, which is you would still have, because the word is they want to make a couple other signings, you would still have to come up with money immediately. And that could cost you for example, Anthony Averett, who's making $2 million. That might be something that you have to say, we don't have room, if we do this, to spend $2 million on a reserve cornerback. And a lot of people would say, well, of course you do that. It's this Julio Jones we're talking about. Well, we're assuming the guys are going to get hurt, especially now playing 17 games this year. Having somebody that you can trust who played well, Anthony Averett did a year ago, would help you a great deal. So you would have to you have mostly gotten all the money that you can get from redoing contracts at this point. There is very little that's still available. They've mostly done all of that already this offseason. There's still a little you could go back. Like Pat Ricard maybe has a little bit of flexibility within his deal that you can get a little bit of money back. But you would have to find in the neighborhood of say $5-6 million, presuming you're going to be signing other free agents. And that could cost you something at some point to do it, which is why, again, I don't think it's a slam dunk. But when people are right to point out the cap, when we have this conversation and ignore the cap and pretend like guys don't get paid money, we're acting like idiots. But we can actually look at the cap and say, this is not something that dismisses it. It's something that makes it a little bit more difficult and ultimately might be too difficult to get done. Mm-hmm. But I don't think it's immediately something that says there's just no way the math can work. There is a path to making the math work. It's going to require a little bit of pain in order to do it.
All right. Hey, guys, we could go on for an hour talking about the draft.
Let's do it.
We're actually going to have the draft tomorrow night. Glenn, recap for us what our coverage is going to be and where people can see it.
Yeah, again, we'll be live at Looney's Pub Perry Hall tomorrow night or Thursday night, the 29th, starting at 7:30 for our show. The event starts at 7 with our friends at Grade 8's Memorabilia and Gus Edwards. And it's a meet and greet. It costs you money, but understand that's the money that's going to Meals on Wheels for taking care of a great charity. So go get your tickets.
Is Gus there to help that?
Yeah, Gus is going to be there. You have to purchase a meet and greet ticket, which gets you your picture and autograph. But again, the money is for Meals on Wheels. It's so that they can take care of a great charity. So grade8smemorabilia.com to get your tickets for that. But more importantly, our broadcast, myself, KZ, Jeremy Kahn, tomorrow night starting at 7:30 or Thursday night starting at 7:30, facebook.com/PressBoxSports, PressBoxOnline.com/radio. And then we'll be back in the studio on Friday with myself and KZ and Kyle, and Stan will be checking in, and the Project Game Day draft special throughout the course of Thursday and Friday night of the draft.
All right. And where can people watch the actual draft? It's on ABC tomorrow night?
ABC and ESPN and NFL Network and all streaming in 100 places. This is why the salary cap's going up in coming years, because there could not be more media money coming in. As much as people complained about NFL, and I think the ratings are down, there's just nothing that compares. There is nothing in live
I agree
media.
with that.
Yes. And where is it taking place? Are they doing this?
They're doing it in person in Cleveland. They're doing it
okay.
As they plan to. They're doing it in person. They built a giant stage out on the water, and the crowds will be down a little bit from what you saw in, say, Nashville or Philadelphia or Chicago over the years, but they are doing a live event in Cleveland for the draft.
All right. Hey, by the way, I'll just update you so that people don't get the wrong impression. As far as I know, Jim Henneman is not a retired sports writer. He writes for PressBox still, unless you know anything, Glenn, because they just showed him at the ball game tonight, and it says retired Baltimore sports writer and official scorer Jim Henneman.
He is a retired official scorer. That part is true. He is the
Correct.
Retired official scorer, which he wrote about, obviously, for PressBox, and it was beautiful. And I just talked to Jim a couple days ago. But no, I don't think he will ever be a retired sports writer.
Nope.
I think he will at one point. Sadly, one day he will be a late sports writer.
Yep.
But there will never be a day where he is a retired sports writer.
I agree. Gary Stein, I appreciate it, as always, for being on. You and I have an interesting show next Wednesday, where we're going to have Miss Lacey DaCosta to help us recap the draft and find out what it's like living with Eric during this week for the draft. All right.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that, Stanley.
All right.
I knew her before she was Miss DaCosta, so I've known her quite a while, and
I
I'm really
know.
looking forward to it.
All right. Well, we're looking forward to that. We're looking forward to the Ravens draft. Want to thank Glenn Clark for doing the show. Gary Stein, as always. I'm Stan the Fan, reminding you that Pressbox Live is brought to you by C3 American Exteriors. By the way, GAF Roofing has designated C3 American Exteriors as a Master Elite status. GAF Roofing are the folks that make all the tiles for the roofs. So this crew that you have working on a C3 American exterior roof is going to be the top of the line. And we thank them for sponsoring this. We'll see you next week. And have a good evening, everybody. Bye.